let's talk about what organic is, first of all, because there's some misunderstandings about organic versus synthetic. So you could have, and also natural. So in most people's minds, when they hear organic, they are thinking about a practice, using things that are naturally around them, things that are sustainable. And that I consider, natural farming, where everything is pretty much organic. But here's the thing, what organic truly means is carbon based. So if you were to approach any institution, any type of scientist or anything else, and you're talking about organic, it means that it is carbon based. Now, some of the things that we use in agriculture don't contain carbon, but they are natural. Things like gypsum, for instance, which is calcium sulfate. Now, it's a natural component. It comes right out of the earth. There's an abundance of it. It's easily accessible, and it doesn't have any negative impacts on the environment when it's applied correctly. And also I want to make sure people understand, just because something is considered organic doesn't necessarily mean safe either, because there are things that are organic that are also they're not safe, or if you're over applying something, it can still have a detrimental impact to the environment or people around you. And so when we're talking about organic in this context, we're talking about both meals. Those are usually your organic inputs. And then you have things that are natural, like your rock minerals. And then you also have natural salts, like Epsom salt. That is a natural occurring mineral. And it is a salt. And what a salt is, it's a cation, an element with a positive charge attached to an anion, which is an element with a negative charge. And what happens is, it just means that negative and positive attract, and so they've created a covalent bond. It's not a very strong bond, and so they dissociate in the presence of water. And so when we're looking at something like gypsum or copper sulfate or iron sulfate, these things are natural. They come from the ground. They are not synthetically produced. So the difference between organic and natural, so we're using things that are organic and natural. We're not using things that are synthetically created, right? Like that come from the Haber-Bosch process of creating nitrogen from gas, right? So there's just, and then, some of the synthetics, if you were to talk about like DAP, diammonium phosphate, right? You're essentially mixing ammonium and phosphate. And the way that would work is, you would take a natural mineral element that contains phosphorus. You're attacking that parent apatite material with something like sulfuric acid. And what that does is it releases the anion that we were mentioning, that phosphorus anion from that parent apatite material. It liberates that, and they're able to separate that out. Now they take that phosphorus, and then they mix that with the ammonium that was made during the Haber-Bosch process, and they get, monoammonium or diammonium phosphate. Now, those things take a lot of energy and resources to produce. That's why we're looking at these and going, hey, may not be the best way to do it, because of the resources allocated to the production of those things. They're not and also, like, if they're used properly, or if they're, they have less of a detrimental impact, right? And so but the problem is that even when you create something like diammonium phosphate, which has really high nitrogen value and a really high phosphorus value, those things are both biologically mediated, right, naturally in systems. And so as soon as you put that down, you're going to lose nitrogen immediately, because it goes through a process that is mediated by biology, and some of that can off-gas back into the atmosphere as atmospheric nitrogen. Some of it will be leached away. It's got a very low nutrient use efficiency. So even though you're putting high numbers on there, maybe like 42% phosphorus in this case, not all of that is going to be available. What happens is, as soon as that is liberated, both that cation from the ammonium and that anion from the phosphorus, those are liberated. And so now you have a highly reactive anion that doesn't stay in that form freely in nature for very long. And so what it does is it attaches to other positively charged particles in the soil. And so it can tie up things like iron and calcium and zinc and manganese. It can tie up these other elements, making them unavailable to the plant. And so the thinking is, oh, I'm adding in a bunch of this mineral nutrient, but what you're actually doing is you're causing a chemical reaction when those things dissociate and are liberated within that system, where they start to tie up other things, making the things that were already there that were available become unavailable. And so there's a bunch of chemical reactions that are happening. And there are biological reactions that are mediated during these processes. Carbon, phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, and iron are all very highly biologically mediated in these soil systems. And so we have the nitrogen cycle, we have the phosphorus cycle, we have the carbon and sulfur cycles. And then iron is a whole different beast in itself when we're talking about the natural acquisition of iron into the plant, is because iron, it oxidizes so rapidly in the pH ranges that these plants are usually optimally operating in, and then also in the presence of water, because the water is an oxidizing agent, and so it gives off its hydrogen ions to that ferric iron and causes it to oxidize into Fe3+, which isn't really available to a lot of plants. And so with biology, you can have things like the production of amino acids and ionophores that can keep that iron in a metabolically available form. So there's all these different nutrient interactions that are happening. And so when we're talking about synthetics versus natural, we have these anions that are in great abundance that start to tie up stuff, but also they acidify the organic matter that's already there, causing a reduction in the amount of total organic matter. And we need, about 5% is ideal for ideal crop production and for these biologically mediated processes to be able to continue to happen. And the less percent that we go under that, the less biological mediated processes are happening. So we have to add continuously more and more and more, and it just compounds the problem over time. And so when we're looking at things that are naturally derived or organically derived, we still have to look at the application rates. We still have to be responsible in the timing, the when, the what, and the why, or the when and the where. We have to be mindful of the application still. However, these things are usually less resource dependent, and they're also less energy dependent, and then they're less environmentally impactful, or they don't have an environmental impact that's going to be negative. Usually will have a positive environmental aspect to it, because with an organic amendment like a meal, and we'll divide these up, we have meals, which are going to be a slower release. You'll get some nutrient availability right away when you apply those, but things like alfalfa meal, soybean meal, blood meal, bone meal, guanos, those types of things, they'll take a little bit, up to 3 or 4 weeks to be completely broken down. Now, so those are all organic. And so when we're talking about organic amendments, I'm usually talking about meals specifically, because those are a carbon-based organic substrate that actually takes the breaking down of that material for whatever's in there to be released into the system and become metabolically available for the plant and the bacteria and fungi in the soil. Then there are the rock minerals that you have, things like calcium phosphate, azomite, you have glacial rock dusts. You have those type of things that are usually going to increase your cation exchange capacity, your ECE of your soil. It's usually going to bring in some type of calcium source, some type of phosphorus usually, and then trace minerals. And then you have your natural salts, right? Things like Epsom salt, gypsum. Also step back. In those rock minerals, we also have things like calcium silica and also liming agents that will help with pH Then we get into natural salts, Epsom salt, gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. We have all the mineral sulfates that are all naturally occurring, potassium sulfate, and then all the micronutrient sulfates. And then also for boron, either borax or solubor, which is sodium borate, which is another naturally occurring salt. And again, these things aren't detrimental in the systems, but you do still have to be mindful of what you're adding in, because you're looking for sufficiency, but you're also looking for balance between all the elements. And so the difference between all of those elements is that 3 to 4 weeks on the organic meals, usually you'll have some mineral availability in the rock minerals, like calcium silica. You'll get the silica and calcium. A nice portion of that is available. And then you have your salts. Salts are immediately available. And so what happens is they disassociate when you put them in water. Some of them will react with other elements. So that's one of the things that you need to be, mindful of. If you have a cation, it's going to be attracted to an anion. So that's why the sulfate is the anion in all the mineral sulfates, and then all the rest of them are all cations. So whether it's zinc, copper, manganese, magnesium, or calcium, they all have a sulfate state that they can be in. Those disassociate in water and they're metabolically available right away. So you can add Epsom salt, gypsum, and all your iron sulfate. One of the things that you can do when you're adding these into your system is you can add humic and fulvic acids, and that'll help them stay in a metabolically available form. Because just because they are available, things change in real time, right? Some things will bond with this, the plant will take some stuff up, some of the biology will use it and immobilize it for the plant, and then it'll be in the and then that'll have to cycle to be released again. So a bunch of different stuff happens. But out of all of those natural compounds, the mineral salts will always be more available. You'll always have a higher availability.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.